Some days we feel like we have no control over our life and we keep on making the same mistakes over and over again. When this happens, I like to take a step back and examine my life to get a better understanding on how my performance patterns of my roles, my rituals, my habits, and routines are negatively or positively impacting my life. One of the best ways to do this is to take the time to track our day-to-day activities. It's like taking a step back and watching my whole life from an outsider's perspective. When tracking our day-to-day activities, you want to make sure that you focus on one area of your life at a time. If you're looking at multiple things at once, it's going to be much harder to understand what is positively and negatively impacting what. Trust me, just pick one. In hopes of understanding why I can't step away from the pantry, we're going to use the example of snacking. The first step is to start tracking. Since our days fluctuate from week to week, I suggest doing this exercise from 1 to 4 weeks at a time. If we are taking our example of trying to understand our snacking, we would want to track every time we had a snack, what we are doing in the time leading up to that snack, and the emotions we are feeling while having the snack. Since snacking can be dependent on the meals we've had for that day, you also want to include what you've eaten for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. In this example, you can see that the person tracked the time the snack was eaten, 2, 3, 5 o'clock, what they had for a snack, handful of granola, pretzels, and fruit, and the emotions they were feeling during that snack, stressed. The second step is to look for any patterns. This is my favorite part of the exercise. I like to grab myself a nice cup of tea and a highlighter and look for different patterns that I notice. If I'm feeling creative, I'll use different highlighters for each pattern. Finding patterns helps shows consistency or a rhythm. Once we find a pattern, we need to see what the root or the cause of that pattern is. Remember, we are looking for both positive and negative patterns. In this example, 3 patterns have been identified. 1, the individual snacks every day between 2 to 4. 2, snacking is caused by stress. 3, when the individual is snacking later on in the day, they are having larger snacks. The third step is to look for our supports and barriers. So a barrier are things that are either stopping a healthy behavior or promoting a negative behavior. And a support are things that are promoting a healthy behavior. Supports and barriers are usually something in your environment. It could be a specific time of a day, a person, or an emotional feeling. This step is going to be the hardest part because we need to analyze our life and say, hey, what supports and barriers are causing these patterns? If this is difficult for you, I suggest that you spend 1 to 4 weeks tracking like you did in step 1, but focusing on what are the natural supports and barriers that you have. I always like to start with my barriers just because I think it's easier and it kind of helps my thought process. Reflecting on the 3 patterns mentioned previously, some examples of barriers may be stress or poor coping strategies, proximity to the pantry, large gap between the time that you have lunch and when you have dinner, and some examples of a support may be healthy snack options, having a break in the afternoon where you can measure out a healthy snack instead of just grabbing something, or knowing healthy coping mechanisms to deal with stress. The last step is to help us understand how our supports and barriers are being impacted by our performance patterns. I like to look at each one of my supports and barriers and tie it to one of my roles, rituals, habits, and routines. Once we are able to narrow it down and pinpoint what areas of our performance patterns are causing this behavior, we are more likely to positively change it. So let's start with barriers. So first, we have stress or poor coping strategies. This example is being affected by my role, and it's also being affected by your habits. So your role of being, maybe it's your profession or your role as a caregiver, is causing stress. And how we're dealing with that stress is we have formed this negative habit of going to the pantry and grabbing a snack. Second, proximity to patterns. This is an example of a routine. You formed a negative routine in the afternoon of getting up every day at around 2 or 3 o'clock for a snack. So how can we change this negative routine? Maybe instead of getting up for a snack, we get up to go for a walk with a friend. Or maybe we take that time in the afternoon to respond to emails. Or maybe use that time for a social media break. Lastly, you have a large gap between the time that you have lunch and the time you have dinner. Again, this is part of your routine. Your routine every single day is to have lunch at 11. So what can we do to change our routine so that we can maybe push our lunch back to 12? Can you change your meetings? Can you change the time that you see patients or you see a student? Is that possible? For some people that may not be possible. For others, it could be. Now let's move on to supports. So we have healthy snack options. So sometimes when we're looking at this, not everything is going to be impacted by our performance patterns. Sometimes it's going to be positively impacted by our environment. So when you're doing this exercise, you also need to look at your environment. How is my environment negatively or positively affecting my performance patterns? So having healthy snack options, that's affected by our environment. In the environment that we're in, there's our healthy snack options, but we could also have this as our environment is filled with chips and cookies, and we've created a negative environment for ourselves. Typically having a break in the afternoon. So this is a great support because you can take that time and you can measure out a healthy snack. Maybe you're cutting up fruit or vegetables and maybe you're measuring out a snack. Instead of just aimlessly grabbing things from your pantry, you're more likely to make a healthier snack choice when you have the time to consciously think it out and possibly measure something out. And knowing healthy coping mechanisms. So personally for me, as my role as an OT, I have learned healthy coping mechanisms to teach my students, to teach my patients that I can use in my own personal life. So reflecting on your own personal life, what roles have you had throughout your life? Maybe as a student, you've learned healthy coping mechanisms, or as a parent, or as maybe as a friend, you've helped other people learn coping mechanisms. Can you use that in your own personal life? You might complete this last step and realize that you have only identified 2 out of 4 performance patterns, and that is totally okay. Most people will probably only focus on 1 or 2. In today's example, I only associated my barriers and strengths with my roles, my habits, and my routines. Alright guys, that is it for me. I hope you enjoyed this video. I look forward to seeing you in my next one, and I wish you all a very happy and healthy day wherever or whenever you're watching this. Bye friends.